have plenty of coffee. I'll be fine. This is not that formally structured thing, and so Nathan knows a pretty substantial amount about OHM already, so if he is going to be the main person I'm talking to right now, then we're going to go into some of more thinking I've done at a more advanced level. Whereas if people come in who have limited familiarity with OHM, then I have more basic stuff I can talk about. In the meantime, just for entertainment value, the screen I have displayed on Twitch is from the New York Public Library's deployment of MapWarper. And the map in the center of the image is a Sanborn Insurance map from 1910 showing a baseball stadium where Presbyterian Hospital is today. And this was a stadium where the team, which is known today as the New York Yankees, played around 1910 plus or minus. And we can move the slider here on this view at the bottom. Go ahead, slider, move, and we can see Presbyterian Hospital. And they were called the Hilltoppers because this was Highland Park, and it was, well, you know, nothing on Manhattan is really that high, but it was one of the higher points on Manhattan Island. And so this is a good example of a couple of things. It's an example of how, when you can find reference points for these old maps, you can align them really well. Also, something that everybody should know is that for urban areas, Sanborn Insurance maps are full of staggering amount of detail, and if you can find the right one, you can get an awful lot of information for precise mapping. Well, I'm watching the stream too, so that I know what's going on and can read chat, so it may still be just us. So anyway, a topic that is not really basic, only somewhat basic, but it's one I was thinking about, is life cycle concepts, because, you know, there are some efforts at doing life cycle in OpenStreetMap. There are actually a variety of approaches. There's even a web page comparing and contrasting them. And I kind of went through it a month or so back, looking at the variety of approaches, and realized that some of the concepts proposed are really not good, but a number of the concepts actually are more or less in line with the things we're kind of doing in OHM now and are fairly workable. So starting with one that is really not good, somebody had proposed a method for allowing things like different names on different dates, which involved putting the start and end dates as part of the key in the key value pair for a tag. And this was something that I just had a negative reaction to. Okay, there's somebody popping into voice chat, and it's Nathan. Hi there.
I'm still muted.
Yeah, that'll do it. That's sort of been the refrain of the entire world for the last year and a half.
Yep.
So anyway, I was just bashing the idea of jamming dates into the key side of the key value pair, and it's something that OHM does not support and is not going to support based on my read of the situation, and I agree with that. The idea of using relations with start-end dates is now fairly well established in OHM, although it's not entirely supported by the renderer just yet.
Yeah. I put a ticket in for it.
Yeah, I think that it's really good right now as the renderer is in a state of iterative improvement to not get too aggressive that we have to have things right away, but just put in tickets and let things work.
Yep.
Okay.
I have a couple situations. I stuck it on the worldwide test sheet that's kind of north east of Seattle. Some different ideas there.
Yeah, other thing I got mentioned here, I got a little set of notes I threw together last night of things to touch on. In some cases I find that duplicating ways is really the only way to handle some situations. I ran into that a little bit in North Albany, and I'm sure I'll see more of it. And hard to edit.
And that's approvable as well, so.
But the main thing is this will all get easier with advancing editor support, and I think we're on the track to things like having good filters and JAWSOM plugins and tweaks to ID.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing where we just sort of suffer with the present, submit tickets, and watch things get better with time.
Yep.
So something I put some time into thinking about recently, I think you may have seen the wiki page I set up, and I've been continuing to think about this and learn some more about it since I did that wiki page, so some of this stuff may be new. Thing is that OSM doesn't have any particular requirement for accurate time, and is often typical in OSM. You get things like the opening hours tag, where the designers of it, people who set up the value side of the key value pair, didn't even think about machine parsing. And I don't know the current state of it because I've pretty much been ignoring it for a couple years, but they had produced a format for describing opening hours that was not machine parsable by any parsing engine I'm familiar with. And that's not uncommon for people who don't know parsing, or not software people, to start cooking these things up, and they don't understand what the challenges can be.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter if you're in OSM all that much if you don't really have a thought through approach to handling time, because OSM is really firmly rooted in the now. But there are issues, and you get into the wiki page for the start date, and you go through there, and there are a couple of things that on the face of them seem very reasonable, and then you start excavating and realize, well, okay, maybe there is an issue here. One of the things they do is they explicitly cite ISO 8601, which is a standard date time format from the lovely and talented International Standards Organization. And that didn't bother me at first, because I've been in software a long time, and there are lots of pieces of software that announce ISO dates are the way. I was a Java programmer for a long time, and everything is ISO 8601. XML is 8601. Everybody is 8601. And we all basically know how to look up the wiki page or the Java docs to remind ourselves of what that date format looks like, and it's all compatible, and that's cool. And so on the face of it, that's a really reasonable thing to say. But then you start to find out, if you do a little bit of mining, that maybe it's not that clear cut. First problem is that ISO 8601 is an international standard, but it's not a free open standard. If you want an actual physical copy of 8601, you got to pay the ISO for it, because that's a traditional standards organization that helps fund itself by charging for its work product, which is, that's a very classical model. And if nobody else is going to fund them, then they got to fund themselves. IEEE is the same way. If you want a copy of the Ethernet standard, you got to pay IEEE for it. So this is specifically not an ISO bashing session, but it's a reminder that since none of us really have ever read the standard, we've just read the wiki page or Java documents or something, we only know what's made it to there. But on top of that, that got written into the wiki page when there was only one 8601 standard. And things happened after the first ISO 8601 standard. One of the things that happened was the Library of Congress instituted the EDTF format, Extended Time Date Format, which was a compatible extension of 8601 that allowed for things like uncertainty and interval specification, all kinds of useful things in historic mapping. And it was pretty well thought out, because the Library of Congress's customer base are people who are trying to deal with historical things like that. And so the ISO became involved, and they made a bunch of changes to EDTF. And so now there is 8601-1, which is the original date standard, and there is an 8601-2, which is the ISO's own version of EDTF, which is its own pay-for standard. So now I look at the wiki page and I think, well, they say ISO 8601. Well, that's no longer precise enough. And the other issue is that, once again, 8-1 and -2, they're both pay-for standards. So if you actually want to see them, you need to approach it by paying money or finding somebody who will tell you what is in it, let you look at their copy or whatever. So the good news in all of this is that the Library of Congress took their EDTF format and they revised it so that it would be a compatible subset of 8601-2 that covered what they saw as the important cases, and they published that on the web. So I'm not at the point now of being ready to advocate for a change to the OSM wiki page, but I think that probably a good long-term thing to do is to start having us migrate to the Library of Congress format, because that is a published standard. So are you following this so far?
Yes.
And now the other thing, if you look at the start date wiki page, is that after they have their talk about using ISO format, they then proceed to provide a bunch of ways of specifying intervals and uncertainty, and there's a whole list of it. And once you know the issues with the ISO date time format, in particular the existence of -2, then you look at this whole thing with intervals and uncertainty and you realize that it's entirely ad hoc. It has no roots in the ISO format. It's just invented because somebody felt like they needed to do that. And again, this is not bashing the people who did the ad hoc stuff, because it's okay. It's parsable, I think, for the most part. But it is no longer in conformance with 8601, because now there's a 8601-2 extension. So if you were to migrate the start date wiki page to EDTF, you would also probably need to deprecate the vast bulk of all of that stuff as being superseded by using EDTF. And once again, it's hardly a crisis because there's probably not much of anything that's actually in OSM that uses any of that because, again, OSM isn't doing history anyway.
Yep.
So my thinking is probably just to move OHM in the direction of EDTF and then start discussing the issue in OSM forums about how, we ended up going this way for these reasons.
Yep.
So a project I've been working on and have not finished and have been off of for a while, and maybe we'll go back to when I have more copious spare time, is a machine parser that's portable to several languages that will basically convert EDTF into the internal OHM timeline. And if we can supply that to the folks working on our version of ID and the guy who has done the OHM plugin for JASM, supply it to the fine folks at Overpass for a potential time-date comparison, and then make it available to the actual back-end folks, then we could have really consistent parsing of dates, times, and behavior, and that would be kind of nice.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But then that's where it gets big and complicated, because one of the points that has been made to me by longtime OSMer whose name I'm going to butcher, Min from Ohio, is that there are a lot of places in the world for which Gregorian clock and calendar are relatively new and novel things. Like there's a whole bunch of Asian calendars. There's also this tendency to presume that changing from Julian dates to Gregorian dates was a light switch, and that everything before a particular year is one and everything after is the other, which is not true because Greece was using Julian dates until the 1920s. And so we need to think about representing dates and times outside of Gregorian dates in ISO 8601. And I've only done the most superficial look at that. And it's obviously going to be a much bigger project that needs a bunch of people looking at their own specific areas of interest. I don't see any way that this is a one-person effort, just because of the magnitude of the research. But I've looked a little bit about Julian dates, and that doesn't look like that's going to be too painful. Roman dates are going to suck. There's a reason why Julius Caesar introduced the Julian calendar reforms in the first place. Roman dates are a nightmare. Turns out that the Roman dates were under the control of a priesthood in Rome, which was politically involved, and since the annual terms of Roman councils were tied to the Roman calendar year, the priests would lengthen or shorten the year in order to get rid of unpopular councils or keep councils they liked. So there is no formula for converting Roman dates into Julian dates. It just, you need a table lookup.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the sum total of all of that research. And I probably need to go back and do more documentation on my OHM wiki page on time, because I have new information. But I think the key point here, and I have long been an advocate in OSM for using local units, because when I started, there were people who were out there trying to get us all to convert US speeds and mile per hours over to kilometers, and I always thought that was a little bit ridiculous, because a local mapper should be able to map using local units and leave it to the software to figure it out and convert. If you can just, it's easy to type in mph on a max speed, and then you see max speed 40 and it doesn't have units, then what actually is it, because it's around unit both in metric and English. And so fortunately we seem to have moved away from that, but I still have run into people who apparently have armchair mapped road tonnage limits and haven't understood that tons are different in different places.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, this is a similar concept to use local units. If you're mapping historically, then you have documents that have a local unit, so just map the local unit and let us manage the conversion. That'd be what I want to do. So you have any other thoughts on time here?
No, it's kind of over my head.
Yeah, it's messy. And this is another time issue that I ran across, and which I don't have a solution for. Time zones in the US are a surprisingly novel concept. They were only introduced by the railroads when the railroad scheduling became complicated enough that they needed to use timing to make sure the trains wouldn't collide with each other. And so there is a time before time zones when people's time was referenced to the nearest big town, which was typically working off of solar noon. And honestly, I don't have a good resource for even figuring that out for any given location. I'm sure that information exists somewhere, but there's certainly not a cheap and easy online lookup for it.
Or copyright free.
Yeah, that maybe there's something with copyright on it, but that's of no help. We need something that's open data.
There is a lookup. It's in the NASA data set, but you need to be able to do the georeferencing calculations.
Okay.
Because I have looked at doing that.
It would be a useful capability, although it's also probably a little bit of a software project.
Yes, it's also complicated because the Earth rotation now compared to what it has previously been changes, so therefore everything is constantly moving.
Not really a surprise now that you mention it.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, and that's the thing, is that you kind of envy the OSM side of the house, where they can treat time as such a simple thing.
Yep.
So something I've encountered recently, and I know you've done some things of this sort in your mapping, so maybe you have some thoughts about how to handle this. I had stumbled across a set of survey maps of the original Erie Canal from 1830 to 1834, and was thinking, oh cool, this is a gold mine. I'll be able to do a really nice, accurate map of the old Erie Canal. Which, you know, optimism of the initial discovery and all that. What I figured out is once I had done the easy ones in North Albany, where there were just enough reference points that I could manage to rectify the map properly, I started looking at the ones going north and realized that the community of Menands is entirely modern, and in 1834 nobody lived there and there are no reference points.
Yep. Yep. Lots of data that you have to like find data that's old enough but not old enough. So
yeah, I'm starting to realize that probably what I am going to need to do is find intermediate maps and map things that aren't quite as old until I, you know, have got a stack of maps reaching back that far.
Yep.
But I worry, and it's going to cause me to take a lot of care, I worry about, you know, incremental mapping error that, you know, error always creeps in, is that if the error goes up as I go back in time down the stack of maps, am I really going to be precise enough?
Yep.
Okay, I see somebody else has popped into chat, and they're asking about video availability, and I can have it up on YouTube today or tomorrow, so I'll put that into chat too. You know, hopefully we will cover enough interesting stuff that'll be worth having on YouTube, but you know, it's actually a worthwhile point, so maybe you and I can go through the really basic stuff, you know, tag teaming on this. So that if relatively new people come in to watch this YouTube on video, they will get an introduction.
Yep.
So
the other thing is Twitch will have it for about 30 days.
Yeah, that's good too. So, you know, probably also I will watch through when I do the YouTube edit to take off the boring part at the beginning when I was the only person on, and I can specify the time at which the basic intro stuff starts, which is right now. So the way I have this informal set of notes structured, start off talking about OpenStreetMap, which, you know, has a bunch of really sound things, and the software stack is really sound. No complaints about how well it works. The database schema is really sound. We haven't hit any mapping problems in the database that can't be dealt with without change. And the tagging schema, I'm going to call it mostly sound, because it's got nooks and crannies where you could kind of look at it and say, well, that could certainly be improved on, but it's probably too late now. Okay, I see a question about finding the video. I'm going to post links in various places on Discord and Twitch and on the OHM group and Facebook. And by the way, there's an OHM group and Facebook that's not well trafficked, but you know, I watch it. I'm one of the admins, so that I can suppress anybody who decides to advertise OHM t-shirts if that ever actually happens. And that's an obscure joke, but I maintain an Alfa Romeo group, and stamping out the people who pop in to sell Alfa Romeo t-shirts is ongoing exercise. And also there's a link to my YouTube channel and my Twitch profile, and that's probably where I will upload the video. So anyway, we talked about things that are sound in OSM, and the main thing about OSM, which I mentioned earlier, is that the focus is pretty relentlessly on now. I mean, it's the current map of the world. People experiment with doing historic things in OSM, but it's really not that popular. When OHM popped up, I think a lot of people like me interested in history just migrated to OHM because that was a battle that wasn't going to be won in OSM. So that's basically the OSM summary. Do you have anything for it, Nathan?
No.
So anyway, OHM. When we started out, which was quite a few years ago, we just started with a copy of the entire OSM software stack, nothing custom really to OHM except tweaks to ID, so that it was working on the correct database. And in JOSM, you just need to change where your server is pointed at, and JOSM works. So the big change, which occurred about 2 years ago after the grand software outage, which was a painful period for OHM, was that we got a new rendering engine, completely different from the OSM rendering engine. And it's a vector renderer that understands time, which the OSM renderer doesn't care about time. This is something that we had known was needed for years, but it was a very long time coming, and it actually took the software outage to put us in the position to move over. I don't want to go into all of that because there's a certain amount of dirty laundry there and hard feelings, and that's the past. And so that's made a huge difference, basically adding the time slider to the bottom of the rendering engine. And so it uses start date, which is one of the standard OSM tags that isn't mapped that frequently, but in an OHM context it's really useful. And we use end date, and if you read the OSM wiki, it'll tell you the end date is a troll tag, and that of course is from the mindset that the map is about now. In OHM, it's not a troll tag at all, it's something that you really need. And then, yeah, I already talked earlier about the OSM Lifecycle page. And in OHM, lifecycle modeling is more complex and it's critical. I think the thing I always think of when it comes to lifecycle modeling in OHM, there's a Doctor Who episode back when Matt Smith was the Doctor, in which all of history was happening all at once. And it was a pretty entertaining episode because you've got blimps and Winston Churchill wearing Roman togas, and it was just all pretty bizarre. And that's, every time I bring up JOSM and don't have any filters turned on, and I see all of downtown Albany happening all at once. Yeah, and this is different in OHM. Comment. Yeah, the official OHM t-shirt is a multiple of all your old t-shirts stacked up on each other, and I don't have a problem with shit posting. Keep it up. So yeah, Nathan, any comments at this point?
Nope.
And so I wrapped back around to where I started talking about life cycle concepts. So to keep it extremely brief, there's a OSM wiki page comparing lifecycle concepts. A half to 2/3 of those concepts work in OHM decently, and so I recommend going that route. Jamming dates into the tag side of a tag pair, the key value pair, is a bad plan. OHM doesn't support it, and it's not happening. Using relations to carry start end dates can work if you have an object that's evolving over time. It changes from a secondary to a primary, or its name and route designation changes if it's a road. that puts start end dates on the relations, and the renderer doesn't fully support it yet, but it will at some point. Highway equals construction, construction equals primary, and similar constructs don't work terribly well in OHM. Something I forgot to mention. Start and end date is probably too simplistic. We probably need to start thinking in terms of construction, start, construction, and, place closes, places abandoned, although we could simulate that with relations, so maybe we don't need to introduce a complicated batch of alternate date tags if we're willing to just balloon the relations to show the thing evolving and devolving. In fact, I could just see using relations that way on my Erie Canal map. There's a couple spots in my Erie Canal right now that there are ruins of the lock evident today that can be mapped off of aerial imagery, and I did so. So ideally in tagging I could set up a relation which shows those as ruins, and that actually would represent the modern state of these things because they're still evident. So yeah, that just occurred to me, and that would be a simple way of dealing with that. So anything?
Go ahead. I posted a link in chat. It goes to the test site for our test location for rendering on the main, and it has the proposed construction, preserved, disused, abandoned, raised, and the rendering for it for railways.
Okay, I'm going to go take a look at that so that I know what that proposal basically does and can say something intelligent instead of something useless. And then, editor support, we are getting stuff appearing in ID, JOSM. It'll make it easier to work with because I know my downtown Albany map is very hard to edit in because of the way that streets and waterfront morphed over time. Oh yeah, that's another interesting problem. And I had already become somewhat aware of it, and I know you fooled with it, Nathan, is that with water lines changing over time, you end up starting to play with bodies of water in interesting ways. And where it gets really complicated is where you're looking at ocean shoreline, because OpenStreetMap handles that differently. And for the New York City, the Manhattan waterfront, I pretty much found myself creating bodies of water, natural equals water, that had end dates on them just to show how Manhattan, lower Manhattan, is mostly fill. That in, 1650, lower Manhattan was a much smaller place than it is today. In fact, why don't I bring that up, because we've had the exact same thing showing here since I started this. Oh yeah, there's my Erie Canal map. We see the Hudson River. No, actually that's the Mohawk River, because this is the confluence of the Mohawk and Hudson River. So that's Hudson all the way over on the right. Mohawk kind of center right. The canal more or less in the center here. At the bottom is the Erie Canal, the original one. Then we see a split. The Champlain Canal continues up parallel to the Mohawk. the Erie Canal starts uphill through a series of locks in what is now the modern city of Cohoes. The enlarged Erie Canal over here on the left was a later change to the Erie. And this is a situation where, again, the relations are how I have chosen to convey the start-finish dates, but we're not processing them yet in the time slider, so that has no effect on this display. And I have some things to say about this that I'll come back to, but right now the goal is to go back to the lower Manhattan down here. Which, yeah, I should have zoomed out more because this is Hudson is not a long river, but it's still a 2-hour drive to 2-hour drive from Albany in the Erie Canal down to lower Manhattan. So we're going to zoom in on this version of lower Manhattan. And then what I need to do, okay, this is the modern shoreline. This is all the fill right there. There is a gray half moon sort of thing. I'll put it in the lower left corner, and right, and you can see it. They're sitting next to one of the roads. That is a fortification whose name I am blanking on at the moment, but you can see the fortification is sitting in the middle of a park. I've moved the slider back to 1876, and we can see right off the bat that is much closer to the water. Now we're going to start edging it, and now all of a sudden it's in the water. And we see that the shoreline is pulled back farther, and there are old docks. And we're going to dial it back even older. And now we're looking at 1775. So this is the year before the Revolutionary War turns into the War of Independence, because the war has already started in 1775, but the Declaration of Independence doesn't exist. And that is the British fort on the tip of Manhattan. That defensive battery doesn't exist yet. And we see how far back the shoreline is pulled. So now we're back 1657. And now the name is Neuer Amsterdam because that's a Dutch city and that's a Dutch fort. And so, yeah, this is the kind of shoreline stuff that you get into if you start really looking at it hard. And I know Nathan's done some of this in the Northwest, or it might have been Jeff. Could you remind me, Nathan?
Hmm?
Was the stuff you did in the Northwest that involved water lines, was that your stuff or Jeff's?
Jeff did a lot of that.
Okay. Jeff also did a lot of waterline in Boston, and Boston, like lower Manhattan, is a place that looks really different in colonial times than it does now. Lower Manhattan is a place where they were already filling in waterline even before the British took it away from the Dutch. It goes back that far. Yeah, we have somebody else who's jumped in, Daniel from the Netherlands. And you're muted, and I would ask you what your interest is in open historical map and your knowledge is, but you would have to unmute yourself, and I understand we're in the period where we're still learning mute and unmute from the pandemic. And I see over here in chat, yeah, we need to be able to animate key frame points over time. I completely agree on animation and animation support. One of my long-term goals and how exactly that's going to happen is unclear. But I started building a map of the Antietam battlefield. Actually, the battlefield map itself is pretty complete. September of 1862. It's based on the Cope maps of the battle, which were made around 1900. But what it doesn't have yet are the troop locations, and that's something that Cope mapped in considerable detail under the direction of Ezra Carman. And if we devised a tagging scheme that would allow us to show the movement of troops over time, we could build an animation structure that could be valuable in showing an animation of the battle. And as opposed to canned animations that, historians do and upload to YouTube, which, are nice educational tools and all that. But we could actually do something so detailed that you could decide that you wanted to see the movements of the divisions, but you wanted to pick out a particular regiment, the New York 7th or something like that, and say, show me divisions, except show me where this regiment was during the course of the battle. I just feel like something like that could be a really cool tool. But it goes to starting to work with the challenges that, animation is a thing that needs its own thinking, and I also don't know if we can pull the battlefield fast enough to do it in real time. The database, how fast we can make that go. I don't know, do you have any thoughts about animation, Nathan?
It's coming. It's still a work in progress.
Okay, yeah. And what would be unbelievably cool, but would be a ways down the road, I think, because I doubt anybody is working on this. I've just been thinking about it for a few years. We have good topographic data for the Antietam battlefield, and we also have a detailed plot of the crops that were planted in 1862 in September. Is that you could, in theory, do ground level animations showing the point of view of the troops fighting in the battle and what it was they actually saw. And one of the things that I like when I walk a battlefield is I like getting the actual point of view on the ground. You learn things you don't learn looking at maps. And I think that being able to animate that would be fascinating. But there's a ton of work there, and I'm not competent to do
it. The other thing is that there's a lot of other OSM projects that are out there that are open source. That we can turn into animations or time sliders to better suit the OHM projects that all show off different things in the future.
Yeah. So I guess the answer is that this is not stuff happening right away. It's stuff that could happen if the right energy gets put into it. But there are some really cool things that are enabled by our having a precise digital map of the past. Reason for this project existing. So I've run out of my notes except for a general thing here labeled research. And I think I'm going to use that to get us to the hour. And one of the things that is really different between OSM and OHM is that whole research problem. Where do you find the data? Because OSM, you do a ground survey, you take some photographs, you get a GPS track, you go back and you load up Maxar Premium or Bing or some other imagery, and you're more or less there. Modulo, the concern I have is armchair mappers who believe that these imagery sources are current when frequently they're a couple years old. So there's this ongoing battle in OSM. The armchair mapper decides to fix an intersection and actually breaks it because it's been reconstructed or is being reconstructed, but that's a minor OSM complaint. OHM, we have the completely different scenario where we have maps and aerials. We have to rectify them. The quality of the maps varies. And it's not as simple as maps older than a certain point of time are poorly surveyed. Because I've had Dutch maps of the 1860s that aligned remarkably well in downtown Albany. I find the results fairly believable. And then I've got the Elliott burial map of Antietam, which was a recent discovery in the New York Public Library collection. And I'm looking at it because what it does is it shows the temporary graveyards that were used in the weeks following the battle to bury the Union and Confederate dead. And that seemed like an interesting thing to map. And when I started trying to rectify the map, I discovered that the surveyor was just off a little bit, enough to make it difficult to align the map in its entirety. So I've been threatening to do some kind of a Twitch session just showing how I work with that map. But the realization I had was that I'm going to have to do that alignment piecewise. In other words, align a section, do the burial maps roughly, then align a different section and do the burial maps. That I can't just align it once and then map all of it.
Yep.
And so, yes?
You should see the 1936, 1937 aerial image that I use. Every few blocks I have to readjust.
So, sounds like that camera was just a trifle off level.
Well, it was shot from a plane, so who knows?
Yeah, and I use a lot of aerial shot from planes, and the fact is that while you try as hard as you want to fly your plane with the photogrammetry camera shoved out the bottom, level and straight, if it's a windy day, it's not all going to be. And so, I've been working a lot with a 1952 aerial pass over the Capital District of New York. Some of them just snap into perfect alignment on 3 points, and other ones are a huge battle, and as far as I can tell, it's just that the plane was off level when it took the next frame in the pass. And so, fortunately with these types of aerial passes, there's a lot of overlap, and so my conclusion is that I want to align the center. And then, having aligned the center, I crop around the perimeter and worry about the next image over. And let's see. We're going to go to Map Warper here just because I like Map Warper. And yeah, Firefox certificate warnings. When Tim bought the certificate from Map Warper, he bought it for without the www. So if I put in www, life is annoying. Search for a Mosaic, Capital District, New York, 1952. This is all of the aerial stuff I've lined up. Much of it could be improved, but you get into that basic problem. You see, I haven't cropped any of this yet, so that's one of these steps I need to go through. That's typical working with a big aerial pass. Let's search for Albany. And this is one I have done a bunch of work on, and I am Going to go back and do more because it's a big set. But this is Sanborn insurance maps of Albany, New York in 1892. And for urban areas that are valuable enough that Sanborn bothered to map them, this is a huge resource. But the thing is that the Sanborn tiles are typically only 4 or 5 blocks tops, and so you end up really needing to build a big mosaic like this.
Yep.
But the accuracy is really good, so I'm happy to continue using them. And I used most recently I used the 1888 Sanborn insurance maps of Cohoes. Basically, in 1834, when they built the Erie Canal through here, I have a map, but Cohoes did not exist. So I can't align it right now. I may eventually get to that point. But in 1880, whatever it was, 1885, we have the enlarged Erie Canal over here on kind of the left edge. Have the Champlain Canal entering the Mohawk River right here. There's another mapping project. Is Champlain Canal is shown as entering the river at water level. Well, the Champlain Canal was built in 1820 plus or minus, and I know that the state dam across the mouth of the Mohawk here isn't that old, so it was a research problem to find out that this is not the first dam, and that in fact they built a dam in 1820 plus or minus so that the Champlain Canal could cross the Mohawk here at water level and get picked up on the other side. And this actually gets back into another example of a water level problem. That,
yep.
Okay, right up here, yeah, so this here is the Crescent Dam. You see the big arc there, and then the dam across there. And then this over here is the New York State Barge Canal. Because the history of the Erie Canal is that there are 3 canals. There is the original canal, which was built in the late 1810s, early 1820s. There was the enlarged canal, which was officially built like 20 years later. Oh, that's another point I wanted to mention. But anyway, then in around 1920 plus or minus, they built the Barge Canal. And what they did was they, instead of having the canal run parallel to the Mohawk, they just kind of built a series of dams and then passages around the dams and mostly moved the canal into the river. So this dam dates from 1920 plus or minus. No, I want to zoom out. I don't want to change the grayscale. So if you look at how wide the Mohawk River is up here, well, not before 1920. And so I'm going to be remapping that chunk of the Mohawk River with start and end dates to show how much narrower it was back in the past. And I believe parts of the original Erie Canal may have been swallowed up by the width of the Mohawk.
Yep.
Another issue I encountered when looking at this, we'll zoom back in here. I don't yet have a map of the early Erie Canal through here that I'm completely comfortable with. One of the things is that in 1885 we see this canal, which is the enlarged canal, And then we see this waterway, which appears to me to be roughly on line with the old Erie Canal and may actually be repurposed old Erie Canal. But I haven't found the documents that support that yet, so I have not chosen to just assume that it's correct. I guess this is one of those things where OHM is a boutique mapping project. People are going to worry about different levels of precision in their work. I don't know. I'm kind of an obsessive researcher, and I want to be really sure before I map something. I suppose that makes my work go slower, but it makes me happier about it if I have gone to the trouble to figure this out.
Yep.
So I want to see if anybody out there in Twitch chat has any comments, or if you have anything you want to add here, Nathan, or because we're now slightly past the hour, and 1 hour is probably a good length where we want to wrap this up. So, anything?
Nothing from my point of view.
Okay, and since I know there's a little time lag, I'm waiting for the chat to see. But I think that it's time to call it a session, and we'll see if there's any interest in scheduling a second one, or if maybe this was the wrong time. I was trying to set it early because this is the time that I usually stream on Twitch when I do my morning Zwift rides, and it might be advantageous for European folks who want to stay up, but you can't satisfy everyone with a time, and maybe a different time is better. So anyway, I'm going to close this out, and
just one thing. I'm also streaming, but I'll be streaming from ID and editing from ID. So.
Okay, yeah, I've got you on my Twitch followed list, so I may or may not see that come up depending on how much attention I'm paying. But yeah, there's a few open street and open historical mappers on Twitch, and so this stuff is going to come up so it's worth looking for. So anyway, I'm going to click the stop button now, but look for me, look for Nathan, look for Martine, look for a few other people on Twitch, and we'll see you the next time.